The next topic is one of my favorite, weird noises, because my wife, every time she gets in my 964, hears noises she swears she hasn't heard before. And I swear I tell her I cannot wait for electric cars because you're going to get one because they make no noise. So anyways, he's going to tell us about the weird noises you may be hearing in your Porsche and what it may be. So Pedro, it's all you.
Thank you. It's great to be back. 3 years. I kind of missed it. We all did. And about the quick answering, it's on the questions. It's gotten me into hot water a couple of times for being so quick. But no, I try. I do my best, and it's a lot of fun. So let's welcome you to our presentation. Did you see how the brakes load there? We're going to be talking about weird noises. So welcome wherever you come from. It's a pleasure to be here, and Tech Tactics East 2023. And before we get into it, let me tell you a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. My name's Pedro Bonilla. I'm a mechanical engineer, but I've got a keen interest in Porsche. I've had it all my life. My dad was a Porsche driver from the beginning. Well, he started on the wrong side. He started with Mercedes, and then he switched over to Porsche when they got beat in 1960. So. But that was it. I was 8 years old, so all I know is 8 years old to now is just Porsche. I'm the founder of Pedro'sGarage.com. It used to be a real garage at one time. Then I retired, moved to Tampa, and then most of you guys won't let me retire, so you started coming up with a door panel fix, and now I've got growing up again the business. My son is working with me, and we're trying our best to repair the door panels. So thank you very much. I'm also the founder of Pedro's Board. It's a board with 9,200 members. So just you can discuss anything you want about Porsche and then just have fun there. I've been a member of PCA for over 25 years. I've had a Porsche for more than 40, but the first 15, I wasn't living here in the U.S. I was all over the place. So I still had a Porsche, but became a Porsche member in 1998 when I was living in St. Louis. And now went to the east side of Florida, and now I'm on the west side of Florida in Tampa area. I spend my time mostly when I'm not working involved with PCI. As you'll see, I'm an HPD instructor. I love teaching mid-engine, also getting students to learn the best way to go around the track in their mid-engine Boxster or Cayman. I'm also the chief of tech for the 48 Hours of Sebring, which is the largest club race that we have. It's one of the largest club races in the world. So I'm working with this with the Scroots from the committee side for that. I am also a national Scroot, so when I'm not doing that at Sebring, I work at 6 or 7 other races throughout the country. And when you're a Scroot, you're probably one of the most hated men on the track that day, but we enjoy it because we keep the level playing field. We make sure that everybody is safe, and that nobody has an edge, and that's the game we try to find the guys that want to find the edge. I'm also here because I'm the expert on the Boxster Cayman for the PCA Tech Committee. So as you can see, I'm really involved in all this. But maybe out of all of that, I'm really most proud of being the original owner of a 1997 built Boxster with 310,000 miles now on it. It's actually miles, so. And which I fully restored during the COVID years, and did a full interior with a throwback to the older cars with a plaid interior and everything. So I had a lot of fun with that. But enough said. We're going to be talking about noises today, and hopefully you guys can all help me with it, because it's. I mean, I use hearing aids, so I may hear it a little bit different than most. I know Brian said he'd help out with some of the noises that he's heard. So let me tell you that a clunk is very different from a click, and has nothing to do with a hiss, a click, a squeal, a knock, a bang, or a pop. They're all present there. Those are noises that you really don't want to hear. It's going to be hard to describe the sounds without actually hearing them, but we'll try, and that's where I think your help will come in. But let's see what we can talk about. First, the clunk. I bring up the clunk because it's probably the most common one. It's the one that'll come up first in a newer car. It's generally going to come from the front end, which takes most of the beating because you're always, that's the part that it gets to all of the debris, or you go through the speed bumps and hit them harder than you should and stuff like that. So if it happens when you're driving over rough roads, then the most common cause is going to be the drop links or anything up front that has anything to do with the ball joint. Ball joints are actually wear items, and that's the way they're made. You can see there's an actual ball inside the housing, and then there's finally a dust boot over the whole thing just to keep it clean. And it has, lifetime grease, but lifetime doesn't last a lifetime. And many times what happens is the boot tears because it's dry, because it's worn, because it's used, and then it allows the grease to escape, and you get dust in there, and then dust with grease actually becomes a sandpaper. It's an abrasive, so it starts to reduce the size of the ball and the gap, and now all of a sudden you hear clunk, clunk, clunk. So it's a clunking sound, and that's where they usually come in. I'm now a true expert in clunking. And I'll tell you why. In last year when I went to Sebring, and Brian will remember, I drove from my house to Sebring. It's a 2.5-hour drive, and I heard this clunking sound that bothered me. And this is after I'd done all the work on the interior. So I got there and I said, aha, it's the drop links. So by the time I got there, I called one of my friends in one of my dealers next to Tampa. I knew he was he was the parts manager going there the next day. So I asked Evan to bring me a set of drop links because that was what was wrong with the car. He did. I changed them. The race was over. I drive back home. The car felt pretty good for 10, 15 minutes, and then kung 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 kung. When I got home, I made it a mission that I was going to get rid of the clunk. I knew what it was. It had to be a ball joint. That was it. That's what I'm telling you guys it is. I changed every single ball joint on the front. I did the trailing arm, the control arm. I mean, I banged and I hit with a rubber mallet every single part of the front of the car. And I couldn't find anything, so I changed it all brand new. I figured 300,000 miles, it's got to be. I put it all together and went for a drive. It felt great for about 30 minutes, and then kum 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 kum. So it's like there's no more ball joints. I thought I'd had to live with that. The Boxster, the Porsches on the boardwalk was coming up, which is the event. Many of you maybe have been there in New Jersey, and I wanted to drive up there this past year. So I needed to get that out of the way. When I had the car on the lift, I saw that my front tires were worn. I don't have a way to replace them, change them, or align them. They were worn on the wrong side, so I figured the toe was wrong. So I took it to a friend of mine that has a shop, and I asked him I said, I'm going to have some tires shipped to you. Can you please check it, alignment, and everything? And before I dropped the car off, before I got home, he called me and he says, you have a broken shock absorber. Aha, that's the clunk. The shaft had disengaged, and I hadn't found it because the lift that I have now at home is a 4-post, so it's a drive-on. And when it's loading the suspension, I would bang and hit. As soon as he put it up on one of these lifts, that everything just hung out. He says the whole thing just dropped out of place. So that goes to show you that you can't believe everything you see on the street. So like I said, most of the clunking would be anything that has a ball joint or some sort of a joint. You'll see the drop links are the ones I always say they go first. They do. Some of the control arms and trailing arms. This doesn't have a ball joint, but these bushings also wear out, and they can get the metal to metal eventually and start clunking. Then we got the squeak, and I mentioned squeaking because the squeak generally turns into a clunk if you let it go. So the squeak is also kind of hard to find. Again, most of the time it's going to be suspension related. If you kind of press on the fender a little bit and you hear a little bit squeaking, then you can kind of narrow it down, get back down into the car, look at the control arm, look at anything that has a ball joint. And here's a quick way that we found that kind of works. If you can inject a little bit of grease if you see that they're beat up and everything. You can find a fancy syringe made for grease, or you can just poke a little hole and put one of the red straws that come in with the WD-40. Don't use WD-40, but use some sort of high white lithium grease or something, and spray it well in there. You'll see it swell up a little bit, and you know it's full, and then take it for a ride. If it quiets down, then you know that was it, and you're now living on borrowed time. So it's going to last a little bit. It'll be quiet. It won't upset your significant other, like my wife wouldn't. There was a time in the car that she would not go to date your Porsche night with me because of the squeaking. She said, I am not getting out of that squeaky car in front of everybody. So that's a quick fix if your car gets a little bit of squeak. After that, we got the tick, 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 tick. The ticking sound, there are many things that can tick inside the vehicle. Some are really bad, others are just nothing burgers. So when you hear the ticking sound, first of all, you got to try to figure out where it's coming from. If it's from the inside of the engine itself, from the outside of the engine, if it's rotational, if it's not rotational, if it speeds up with the engine speed, or if it speeds up with the car's speed. So you can kind of figure out if it's engine related, transit related, drivetrain related. So those are the things you really want to start narrowing it down. Generally speaking, most of the ticking is going to come from the engine itself. You'll see that you can get a serpentine belt with just a little nick, and every time it goes around and hits something, it's a loud tick. And you would think that it would make it'd be kind of muted because it's rubber. It sounds metallic. It sounds as if somebody hits it with a little ballpoint hammer, and you can hear the ding, 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 especially where it hits. Pieces of debris in the brake rotor, they can get caught in between the rotor and the backing plate, and every time it goes around, you can click, click. That one will tell you if you speed up the car, it's going to be faster. Leave the clutch in or put it in neutral so you don't speed up the engine, and then you kind of figure out it's the car, not the engine. A pebble or a nail in the tire also clicks. If you have a passenger, get their head out the window and see if they can hear where it's coming from. And finally, like a dried out CV joint. CV joints most people kind of forget about these things, especially with the Boxster and the Cayman. In the first years, they lasted forever. Like my 98, I think I replaced the CV joint boots at 240,000. And people tended to think that, okay, they last a long time. But what happened was that those first cars had a five speed tranny, so the axles really didn't move a lot. And when they came out with a 6-speed or the 6-gear for the Boxster S and then the Cayman S, the axles are now up high, and their travel is way, way higher, and they move a lot more. So the boots just tear really quickly. They last maybe 40,000, 45,000. People tend to forget, so you don't want them to dry out. As soon as you find a CV joint that's cracked the boot, just take it out. You don't have to replace the joint. Just repack it, put a new boot on, and you're good to go. The non-rotating sounds would be, once you determine it's not rotating, generally you get a loud fuel injector. There are some fuel injectors that really, really make a loud sound. You can hear it outside the car, even with the engine cover on and everything. You can get a sticky lifter. Most people, when they hear ticking sound, immediately blame the lifters. Oh, it's a lifter. Generally, it's not. Lifters don't make a lot of noise unless you're running very low on oil. And don't ask me how I know. And finally, the one that threw me out was the loose spark plug. It's a metallic sound. You cannot believe that a loose spark plug would make that sound. It's a loud tick, 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 tick. It's engine related. You get under the car and you can hear it loud, but you can't pinpoint it. So the way I pinpoint is I use a stethoscope, but I don't like the doctor's type, so I use a long screwdriver where you can just put the Phillips point wherever you want and then put the butt end of the screwdriver on your ear, and it works really well. But I went all through the engine, and on this ear I couldn't hear the ticking. I could hear it here. Finally, my son asked me something about a spark plug, and it's like, you think it could be a spark plug? And I went to check. Lo and behold, one of the spark plugs was loose. And the reason why it sounds like that is because you got the spark plug with the boot on top, and then on top of that you've got another seal from the coil pack. So the way it works, I guess, the way it's a little explosion of air coming out every time, and you can swear that it's a metallic sound. So don't ever underestimate that. Check your spark plugs to make sure they're not loose. Knocking sounds, it's never good to hear a knocking sound coming from the engine. And when people say, the engine's knocking, it's completely different. The engine knock is completely different from a knock. A knocking sound is you can have something inside the engine gone bad. I mean, you can be knocking against your valves. You can be having an issue with, due to whatever. It's not good. And that one you can pick up with the stethoscope. If you put it in the engine, you can hear it inside the engine. Then have somebody that's a little more that has a little more experience check it for you, make sure that it's not anything very serious. Because the engine knocking is basically just the pre-ignition if you're using a lower than recommended octane. Although in our cars, they're pretty good at it. The engine will retard timing and kind of prevent that. You'll be driving at lower power. But in the older cars that don't have the knock sensors and all that's where the clatter, it's more like a clatter than a knocking sound, although it's called engine knock, but I just wanted to point it out there. A bang or a pop, that's a sound that, it sounds like a fire, like a gun went off. It's a loud bang. We used to do it when we were kids. My dad had a 454 Chevy station wagon that when we wanted to impress anybody, we'd just, get it up to about 60 miles an hour, switch it off, press the gas pedal twice, and when he came back, we did that until we blew the muffler completely. We put it, and then how do you go explain that to your dad? It's like, it's coming from the inside out. It's not anything that we did it twice. So, sorry, Dad. It's usually when you get a banging or a popping, it's usually a backfire. It's, like I said, unburnt fuel that all of a sudden gets ignited. In many cars, like especially with the turbos, it's perfectly normal. You'll see there's the excess fuel when it hits those in the back, either overheat or. And you can also, if you want to look cool, you can put a spark plug back there. They used to do it on the old Impalas and then just fire it up and whatever. Nowadays the cars are really too efficient and you don't have that much, but if you've got a rich running car, it's like, yeah, get your rocket fire back there. It can also happen on the intake side, the same banging, and it's from the throttle body or from the carburetor, and you can actually see, we're able to capture an image here. Sometimes you see some mechanics that have no eyebrows. It can be either a bad or blocked fuel filter, bad spark plugs, damaged catalytic converters, any sort of thing. You can also have on the intakes for the newer cars, if you have an issue with a leak on the intake, like the first Boxsters had the air tube that came from the air filter into the throttle body, and because of the TUV regulations, they put a couple of warts there to kind of quiet it down. It's just a little balloon type thing that's hooked on the side. Well, sometimes they blow off just because they're held in place with a spring clip, and you don't realize because it's under the lip of the car. You never see it, but that creates a really big air leak that the mass airflow sensor doesn't see because it's on the other side, and it can really do a lot of backfiring. You can actually see it and hear it from the side of the air intake. So if you have a backfire on the intake side, then check for those air leaks like that, because they can actually really do it. Grinding is it's pretty, self-explanatory. If it happens when you're shifting, most likely you have an issue with a synchro, where you don't get the gears up to the same speed and have them mesh quickly, and you'll hear the grinding. You can actually, on some of these, you can see how bad it gets and how worn they get. Obviously that's an extreme, but some cars were notorious for grinding. Most of the older cars, like the 986, 996, have issues with second gear when they're cold. It's just a matter of letting them warm up and using the right gear oil. I guess we're switching. I swear by the Swepco 201, which is a little heavier than the Porsche gear oil, especially for the warmer climates where I do in Florida and do a lot of tracks. So my trannies look good. I've only used 2 trannies in 300,000 miles, so they tend to last quite a while. And by the way, of the 310,000 miles that I have on the car, 44,000 are track miles at Sebring, so they're really they're not easy. A dried out CV joint will also grind when they get the metal to metal. They will grind quite loudly. So don't be surprised if you hear that coming in. The same thing happens with, they'll grind like the wheel bearing. It's just that metal, because you get debris inside, and that becomes, like I said, it's really abrasive, and you're actually grinding dirt and grinding rocks in there. So this is a view of, it's not uncommon to see that. When I used to get cars come in, that would be quite normal to see on some of the cars that boot completely out, no grease at all. And most of the time we were able to bring it back. It hadn't gotten to the point where it was loose, and you were able to clean it, pack it, and put it back together, and it worked quite well. A hissing sound is, well, unless you have a rattlesnake or something, or a snake next to you, it can come from a bunch of stuff. A vacuum leak will generate a hissing sound when you're accelerating. Something on a very hot surface, obviously you'll hear the hissing when it starts to boil. A punctured tire that just started to lose pressure. A leak in the cooling system. An engine that's overheating and venting. Anything that is going out fast will give you a hissing sound. They're short-lived, because once the pressure is away, you won't hear it anymore. So it's not something that you can try to replicate. So usually difficult to find exactly and pinpoint. Rattling is another, again, just something that's loose and moving, and most of the time we hear it in the back of the car. Most of the time they're in the back and in the rear, and they're the heat shields over the cats or parts of the exhaust system. Up here in the north, and anywhere where you have salted roads, these things don't last a long time. That metal is just corroded. They're held on with little spring clips, which, they last maybe 2 seasons with salt, and that's it. And then they're hanging. They usually use 4 or 6 spring clips, and 3 or 4 are loose, and all of a sudden it starts to rattle. They rattle really bad. Just replace them. Don't rip them out and forget about them, because they do keep the heat away from the underside of the car, so they are a safety. You should just, if you catch them in time, replace the clips. If they're too gone, then replace the whole heat shield. But they do play function. I've seen a bunch of people come in and they have no heat shields, and then eventually there's all sorts of stuff that happens, and they don't know why it happened. A whistle, again, it's very distinctive. If it happens, if you hear it from the front of the car, most likely you have a bad alignment between the bumper and and the rear edge of the bumper and the front edge of your hood. If it's lower than, I think it was 7/16 of an inch or 11 millimeters, you would get a really, really loud whistle on the 986, 996, and 987s. So you would have to make sure that, it was between 10 and 4, I think, millimeters. Always wanted the hood to be a little bit under the back edge of the front bumper. If you hear it from the sides, it could be one of the mirrors. The mirrors were notorious, especially on the 987, 997, for whistling, and there were a couple of things that were done, putting a little edge on them and modifying them. Porsche eventually changed the shape a little bit so the new cars don't whistle anymore. And also, if you have a bad door seal or window seal, you can get that whistling of air rushing going through. Obviously, if the car whistles when you're standing still, then this is out the window. It's like if you hear a Coke bottle whistle, that's very, very distinctive of the air oil separator. It actually, you would swear somebody is, blowing on a Coke bottle. The air oil separator has a membrane inside that acts like a reverse osmosis to filter out the oil, but when it rips, it just replicates that sound. And when you accelerate the car, you can hear that Coke bottle whistle. 99 out of 100 times it's the air oil separator, so keep that in mind. If you have a mid-engine car, it's really easy to replace. If you have a 911, it's not so easy because it's on the front left under everything. And according to the manual, you've got to drop the engine. We've found ways of not dropping the engine, but it ain't fun. Ask my knuckles. A roar. Most of us love the roar of the car, but sometimes they roar in a different way, which you don't want. So if you have like a cracked or exhaust manifold, which happens on some of the older cars, you may have a bad gasket in the exhaust system, a loose pipe before the muffler, damaged muffler, a PSC with a stuck valve will be louder than when you want it to quiet down. So all these things can actually make the car roar, and that's an example of one of the cracks in the exhaust manifolds. If you get one of these, then hey, replace them and put headers. It's a nice upgrade. But we see some of these now when we're taking the cars on the racetrack and we're really forcing them. And now when we have some of the spec classes, we're actually seeing a lot more of the cracked manifolds, and it just happens when you try to stress them that much. A squeal. Okay, so a squeal is probably one of the easiest, and it's generally related to the serpentine belt. When you accelerate the car, it's been happening since cars were invented, and you can accelerate and you hear that squeal coming out of the engine bay. It's most likely just a loose belt. You may have a worn belt. You may have a bad tensioner there. So that's an easy one to diagnose. If it comes from one of the wheels, then basically there may be debris again stuck in between, and this time not ticking, but just squealing against that rotor as it goes around. It can happen also if the brake pads are worn. If you have racing pads and you're using it on the street, racing pads need to be really hot in order to work. If they're cold, they're going to just squeal. That was another thing that my wife refused to get out of the car with. And if it's from the tires, just back off the gas a little bit. They'll stop squealing. And so I'm sure that many of you will have other examples of sounds that I don't have here. I know that Brian said he would gladly get up here and replicate them, so we can actually so we can actually hear which one it is. But I think that's about the compilation that I was able to come up with of the weird sounds and how to take care of them.